I found out my husband was going to be a father twice, once with me and once with my mother. Same man, same month, same lie. And the worst part? I was the one who introduced them. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss a single chapter of this. I was 26 years old when I believed for the first time in my life that things were finally going my way. Our apartment was small. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors argue every Friday night, and the radiator made a sound like it was dying every single morning. But it was ours, mine, and Danny's. And on that particular Tuesday evening, I stood in the bathroom holding a little plastic stick with 2 pink lines, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Danny was the kind of man who could make a woman feel like the only person in a crowded room. Tall, with dark eyes that always seemed to be laughing at a joke only he knew. We had met at a bus stop 4 years earlier. He was late for work. I was late for a job interview. We talked for 11 minutes, and he asked for my number before his bus came. I gave it to him before I could think twice. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony with plastic chairs and a cake from the grocery store bakery. My mother cried. Danny's family didn't come. He said they were complicated. I didn't ask too many questions. That was always my first mistake with Danny, not asking enough questions. Life in our neighborhood was hard in the way that quiet places can be hard. Nothing dramatic happened all at once. It was the slow grind of overdue bills, skipped dinners, and dreams that kept getting pushed to next month. Danny worked at an auto repair shop. I cleaned offices downtown 3 nights a week and waitressed on weekends. Together, we made just enough to stay afloat. But that night, standing in that small bathroom with the flickering light above the mirror, none of that mattered. I pressed the test against my chest and closed my eyes. A baby. Our baby. I was going to tell Danny, and everything was going to change for the better. I was sure of it. He came home at 9:30, smelling like grease and cold air. I had set the table. Nothing fancy. Just the 2 of us with takeout containers and a candle I found in a kitchen drawer. He looked at the table and then at me, and something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. More like surprise. Or was it something else? I told him about the baby over rice and beans. He went quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and said, "Okay, that's okay. Not joy, not tears, just okay." I told myself he was in shock. I told myself that was normal for men. I blew out the candle that night believing everything was fine. It wasn't fine. It was never going to be fine again. In the days that followed, Danny became a man I had to watch carefully. It was nothing obvious at first. He still came home. He still ate dinner. He still slept beside me in our second-hand bed. But something had shifted in the air between us. The way a room feels different after a window has been left open in winter. The temperature the same on the surface, but something cold underneath. I told myself I was being hormonal. I told myself pregnancy made women paranoid. I had read that in an article somewhere, and I held on to it like it was a life jacket. He started working later. The auto shop closed at 7, but he didn't come home until 9, sometimes 10. When I asked, he said there were extra jobs, side work. A guy from the shop needed help with a transmission. A customer needed a pickup at the last minute. The excuses were always just specific enough to sound real. I should have questioned more. Instead, I focused on the pregnancy, the nausea that hit me every morning like a freight train, the exhaustion that sat on my chest like a stone, the tiny flutter of something growing inside me that made all the discomfort worthwhile. My mother called that week. Her name was Gloria. She was 51 years old, a wide woman with a loud laugh and hands that always smelled like dish soap. She had raised me alone after my father left when I was 9. She lived across town in the same house where I grew up. 3 rooms, a garden in the back she never had time to tend, and a television that stayed on from morning to night. I told her about the baby. She screamed into the phone loud enough that I had to pull it from my ear. She cried and laughed at the same time. She called me her miracle. She said she was going to make the baby a blanket with her own hands. She said she already loved my child more than the whole world. That phone call was one of the last good memories I have of my mother. When I told Danny she was excited, he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked down at his plate and said, "That's good. Gloria deserves some happiness. Gloria. Not your mom. Not your mother. Gloria." I noticed it. I filed it away in the back of my mind and didn't look at it directly. The way you avoid looking at something bright because you're afraid of what it might blind you to. That night I lay awake, listening to him breathe, and told myself I was imagining things. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a bird, and I stared at it until my eyes burned. I wasn't imagining anything. 2 weeks after I told Danny about the pregnancy, I went to visit my mother on a Saturday afternoon. It was the kind of gray October day where the sky sits low and the whole world feels like it's waiting for something. I took the bus across town with a paper bag of groceries. Things I knew she liked: crackers, canned soup, the specific brand of tea she'd been drinking since before I was born. When she opened the door, she looked different. I couldn't place it right away. Her hair was done. Not just combed, actually styled, pressed and pinned in a way she only did for church or special occasions. She was wearing a blouse I didn't recognize, a deep burgundy color, and she smelled like perfume. "You look nice," I said, stepping inside. She waved her hand like it was nothing. "I had somewhere to go this morning," she said. She didn't say where. Her kitchen smelled different too. Not like her usual cooking, the beans and sofrito that had been the smell of my entire childhood. It smelled like something else, something cleaner, like a man's soap. I unpacked the groceries and tried to ignore the feeling creeping up the back of my neck. On her kitchen counter, near the dish rack, there was a coffee mug I didn't recognize. A large one, dark blue, the kind a man might use. I picked it up without thinking. "Whose is this?" I asked. She turned from the stove too quickly. "A friend's," she said. "Someone from church." I set the mug down. I looked at her. She turned back to the stove. We ate lunch and talked about the baby, and she was warm and funny and held my hand across the table and told me I was going to be a wonderful mother. I wanted to stay inside that moment forever, but on the bus ride home, the mug kept coming back to me. The perfume, the styled hair, the blouse I'd never seen. My mother hadn't dated anyone since my father left. In 17 years, I had never seen evidence of a man in her home. She had told me once, sitting at that same kitchen table, that she was done with men, that they only took from you and left you holding the weight. I thought about Danny coming home late. I thought about the way he had said her name, Gloria, like it was a word he had practiced keeping casual. I pressed my hand flat against my stomach on the bus and stared out the window and told myself it wasn't possible. People don't do things like that, not to their own family. I was wrong. After that Saturday, I became a different kind of wife, quieter, more careful, the kind of woman who watches from the side of her eyes. I started noticing the details I had been too trusting to track before. The mileage on Danny's car. I began checking it. The timestamps on his phone when it lit up on the nightstand. The way he showered immediately when he got home, before even sitting down, before even saying hello. One evening I checked his jacket pocket while he was in the shower. I told myself I was just looking for loose change. I found a gas station receipt. The address was 3 blocks from my mother's house. My hands went cold. I put the receipt back exactly where I found it. I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran the water cold over my wrists until I could breathe normally again. I told myself there were reasons a person might stop for gas near any particular address. The city was not that large. Coincidences happened. I was pregnant and emotional and constructing a nightmare from circumstantial shadows, but I kept watching. The following Thursday, Danny said he had to help a coworker move some furniture after work. He'd be late. I said fine. I kissed him on the cheek and watched him back out of the driveway. Then I called my mother. The phone rang 4 times. 5, 6. She didn't pick up. My mother always picked up. She kept her phone on the kitchen table and answered before the 3rd ring. She had told me once that she was afraid of missing something important. She didn't answer that night. Danny came home at 10:15. I was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark when he walked in. He turned on the light and startled when he saw me. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" he asked. "I called my mom tonight," I said. She didn't answer. He went to the refrigerator. His back was to me. "Maybe she was sleeping," he said. "She never sleeps before midnight," I said. He shrugged. He poured himself a glass of water. His hands were steady. That steadiness, that complete absence of guilt in his posture, was the most frightening thing I had ever seen. That night, I made a decision. I was going to find out the truth, not because I wanted to, but because something inside me, something older and quieter than fear, told me that not knowing was going to destroy me faster than the truth ever could. I started making a plan. The following Monday, I called in sick to work. Danny left at 7:30 as usual, lunchbox in hand, keys jangling. I waited 20 minutes. Then I drove to my mother's neighborhood and parked 2 streets over, behind a laundromat with a broken sign, and I waited. I felt sick to my stomach. Part pregnancy, part dread. I kept both hands on the steering wheel even though the car was parked, because I needed something to hold on to. At 9:47, Danny's car turned down my mother's street. I watched it slow. I watched it park in front of her house, not across the street, not halfway down the block, but directly in front, like someone who had stopped pretending. He got out. He didn't look around. He walked straight to her front door like a man who had done it many times before. The door opened before he knocked. I couldn't see her face from where I was parked, but I saw the door open and I saw him step inside and I saw it close behind him. I sat in that car for 1 hour and 40 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard the entire time, the numbers changing in silence while something inside me came apart slowly, the way old fabric tears, not all at once, but thread by thread. When he came out, he was tucking in his shirt. I drove home. I don't remember the drive. I remember parking and walking inside and sitting on the edge of the bathtub and putting my face in my hands. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but the feeling was too large for tears. It sat in my chest like a stone that had no intention of moving. That evening, Danny came home and acted as though the day had been ordinary. He asked what was for dinner. He complained about a difficult customer at the shop. He put his hand on my stomach and said, "How's the little one today?" I looked at his hand on my stomach and I thought about where that hand had been. I said, "Fine. Everything is fine." But inside, one single question was taking up all the space in my mind. A question I was terrified to ask, because I already suspected the answer would break me in ways I might never recover from. Was I the only pregnant woman in his life? 6 days after I watched Danny walk into my mother's house, I called her. It was a Wednesday morning, early, while Danny was still in the shower. I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone pressed hard against my ear, listening to it ring, and I made myself a promise. I was going to listen more than I spoke. I was going to give her room to fill the silence. People always fill silence eventually. They can't help it. She picked up on the second ring. "Good morning, baby," she said. Her voice was warm, normal. She sounded like my mother, the woman who had braided my hair before school, who had stayed up all night when I had the flu at 13, who had told me 1,000 times that she would burn the whole world down before she let anyone hurt me. "Good morning, Mama," I said. We talked for a few minutes about nothing. The weather, a neighbor's dog that kept getting loose. She asked how the pregnancy was going, whether the nausea was any better. I answered everything calmly. I kept my voice level the way you keep a cup of water level when the ground is unsteady beneath you. Then I said, "Mama, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." There was a pause, just half a second, but I felt it. "Of course," she said. "Is there someone in your life right now? Someone you've been spending time with?" Another pause, longer this time. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because I'm your daughter," I said. "And I've noticed things. You seem different. Happier, but also distant. Like there's something you're not telling me." She was quiet for a long time. I heard her breathing. I heard the television in her living room, a morning news program, the anchor's voice low and indistinct. "There is someone," she finally said. Her voice was smaller now. "It's new." I didn't want to say anything until I knew what it was. My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. "What's his name?" I asked. Silence. "Mama, what is his name?" Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "You don't know him," she said. But the way she said it, the slight tremor, the too careful selection of those 4 words, told me everything I needed to know. "You don't know him" was not the same as "he is no one you've ever met." It was a shield, a constructed sentence designed to be technically true while hiding something monstrous behind it. "Is he a good man?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. And in that pause lived the whole truth, a truth she wasn't ready to hand to me, and I wasn't fully ready to receive. But it was there, crouching in the silence between us like something that had been waiting a long time to come out into the light. "I thought he was," she finally said. I closed my eyes. "Mama," I said slowly, "are you pregnant?" The silence that followed that question was the longest of my life. It stretched across the phone line like something physical, like a wire pulled too tight, and I sat on the edge of that bed and felt the floor of my world tilt beneath me. "How did you know?" she whispered. And just like that, the ground cracked open. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply sat there on the edge of the bed, holding the phone, while my mother breathed on the other end of the line, and the shower ran down the hallway, and the man who had done this to both of us hummed a low tune to himself like a man without a single thing on his conscience. How far along? I asked. 11 weeks, she said. I was 14 weeks. We had been pregnant at the same time, carrying children by the same man. A man who came home to me every night and put his hand on my stomach and asked how the little one was doing. My mother started crying. It was a broken, ugly sound, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep it has no shape. She kept saying my name over and over. She kept saying she didn't know. She kept saying he told her he was single, that he was lonely, that he had been hurt by someone who didn't appreciate him. She didn't know he was married. She didn't know he was my husband. That detail should have made it easier. It didn't. The betrayal lived in two directions at once and crushed me from both sides. My husband had found his way into my mother's life. He had constructed a version of himself she could trust. A false man. A fiction dressed in Danny's face. And he had let her fall. She had not done this to me. She had been done to. The same as I had. But I was sitting in our bedroom while he showered 12 feet away, and I could not separate the grief from the rage from the heartbreak long enough to think clearly. He doesn't know that you know, my mother said. He doesn't know we've been talking. No, I said. He doesn't. What are we going to do? I looked at the bathroom door. Steam was curling out from beneath it. I could hear the water changing pressure, which meant he was almost done. I need you to not call him today, I said. I need you to give me until tonight. She agreed. She was still crying when I hung up. I put the phone in my lap and looked at the bathroom door and waited for my husband to come out. He opened it a few minutes later, towel around his waist, hair wet, looking ordinary, looking like a man who had built two separate lives and tended to both of them with careful, deliberate hands. He smiled when he saw me. Morning, he said. Morning, I said back, and I smiled too, because I had made a decision. I was not going to confront him in that moment, half-dressed and unsuspecting. I was going to let him walk through that day believing everything was still under his control. I wanted him to feel safe exactly one more time, because what I was about to do required him to be completely off guard. I was going to give him the truth all at once, the way he had given me the lie, slowly, without warning, and with no way out. I chose a Friday evening. I made dinner. Real dinner. Not takeout, not reheated leftovers. I cooked the way my mother had taught me. Low and slow, the kind of meal that fills a small apartment with warmth and smell and the illusion of safety. I set the table properly. I lit the candle, the same one I had blown out the night I told him about the baby. Danny came home and looked at the table and smiled. "What's the occasion?" he asked. "I just wanted to do something nice for us," I said. He washed his hands and sat down and ate with real appetite. He talked about work. He talked about a coworker who'd done something funny. He was relaxed and easy and present in a way he hadn't been in weeks, and I understood in that moment how truly skilled he was at moving between worlds without carrying any evidence from one into the other. I let him finish eating. I let him pour a second glass of water. I let the quiet settle over the table like a cloth. Then I said, "I spoke to my mother this week." "Yeah?" he said. He reached for his glass. "She told me about the man she's been seeing," I said. "She said she met him a few months ago. She said he told her he was single." His hand stopped moving, just for a moment. Then it continued to the glass. "He was good. He was very, very good." "That's nice," he said carefully. "Is she happy?" "She was," I said, "until she found out he was married." He set the glass down. I kept my voice even, calm, almost gentle. "She's 11 weeks pregnant, Danny." The color left his face in a way I had never seen a human face change before. It happened slowly, like a light being dimmed from somewhere inside. "She doesn't know his wife," I continued. "She's never met her, but I have. I see her every morning in the mirror." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "You got my mother pregnant," I said. "And you got me pregnant. At the same time, in the same month, while living in this apartment, sleeping in that bed, putting your hand on my stomach and asking how our baby was doing." The silence in that small apartment was total. Outside, a car passed. The radiator made its dying sound. Somewhere down the hall, a child laughed. He tried to speak 3 times before words came. "It wasn't," he started. "I never meant," he stopped again. "She didn't know," he finally said, as though that was an explanation, as though ignorance on her part was some kind of defense for him. "No," I said. "She didn't know, because you made sure she wouldn't." He put his face in his hands. I stood up from the table, very calmly, and I walked to the bedroom, and I closed the door, and I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, and I finally cried. Not for him, for the version of my life I had believed in, for the mother who had been deceived by the same man who had promised to protect me, for the 2 children coming into a world already broken by the man who made them. I cried until there was nothing left, and then I stood up and began to think about what came next. The days after that dinner were the hardest of my life, but they were also the days I discovered exactly what I was made of. Danny did not leave right away. He slept on the couch the first night, silent and deflated, like a man waiting to see if the storm would pass. It wouldn't. On the second morning, I woke up early before he stirred, and I did something I had been planning since the night of the dinner. I called his mother. Danny's family was complicated. That was always the word he used. But I had her number. I had met her twice at the beginning of our marriage, a stiff, proud woman named Lorraine, who lived 3 hours away and believed her son could do no wrong. She picked up on the third ring. I told her everything, calmly, completely. I told her about my pregnancy, about my mother's pregnancy, about the months of lies, about the gas station receipt 3 blocks from my mother's house, about the shirt tucked in as he walked out her front door. I told her about the dinner and what her son had said, and more importantly, what he hadn't been able to say. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I always knew he was capable of something like this." That sentence, those 11 words, hit me in a way I hadn't expected. Not because they comforted me, but because they confirmed something devastating. The people closest to Danny had known who he was all along. I had simply been the last to find out. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called his best friend Marcus, the one Danny had been staying with. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply told him what had happened, and told him that anyone who sheltered Danny while he avoided accountability was making a choice I would remember. Marcus called back 20 minutes later and told Danny to find somewhere else to stay. By the end of the week, Danny had lost the 2 people outside our marriage he relied on most. His mother stopped taking his calls. His best friend had distanced himself. The version of himself he had carefully maintained, the charming, harmless, misunderstood man, was dismantled piece by piece, not by rage, but by truth delivered quietly and precisely to the people who needed to hear it. He came to the apartment one afternoon while I was home. He stood in the doorway looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He said he wanted to talk. He said he wanted to explain. I said, "There's nothing to explain, Danny. I understand everything perfectly." I handed him an envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, already signed by me, with the lawyer's contact information paperclipped to the front. He looked at the envelope, and then at me. "I'm sorry," he said, and for a moment I almost believed he meant it. "I know you are," I said, "but sorry doesn't change what you built, and it doesn't change what I'm going to build without you." I closed the door. I stood on the other side of it and listened to his footsteps go down the hallway, down the stairs, and out of the building, and I put both hands on my stomach, and I talked to my daughter for the first time out loud. Not a whisper, not a thought, but actual words, spoken into the quiet apartment. I told her she was going to be okay. I told her I was going to be okay. I told her that the women in our family had a way of surviving the things that were supposed to break them. Then I went and made myself dinner and ate every last bite. 7 months later, I gave birth to a daughter. I named her after no one. I chose a name that belonged only to her, a name with no history attached to it, no weight from anyone else's story. She came into the world at 5 a.m, small and furious and perfect, and when they placed her on my chest, she stopped crying immediately and looked up at me with dark, steady eyes. I said, "It's okay, I've got you." And for the first time in almost a year, I believed what I was saying. My mother gave birth 6 weeks later, a boy. She named him after her own father, a man who had been kind, a man who had stayed. I thought that was exactly right. I thought that was the kind of statement a woman makes when she is choosing, deliberately, to build forward instead of back. Danny signed the divorce papers without contest. I heard later that Lorraine, his own mother, had refused to speak to him until he did. I don't know if that's true. What I know is that the papers came back signed, and that was the last business I had with him. He asked, through the lawyer, about being present for the birth of both children. My lawyer responded on my behalf. My mother's lawyer responded on hers. Between the two of us, we had built a wall of legal language and documented truth that left him very little room to demand anything. He would have access. The law required it, but he would have it on terms that protected our children first and his comfort not at all. That was the last victory. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but real and lasting, and entirely ours. My mother and I are not the same as we were. I don't think we ever will be. But we see each other on Sundays now. She holds my daughter, and I hold her son, and we sit in her kitchen. The same kitchen where I first noticed the unfamiliar coffee mug, the styled hair, the perfume that didn't belong. And we drink tea, and we talk about the future more than the past. Sometimes she reaches across the table and puts her hand over mine and doesn't say anything, and I leave my hand there. There is a photograph on my refrigerator. It was taken the Sunday after both babies were home. My mother and I are sitting at her kitchen table. She is holding my daughter. I am holding her son. We are both looking at the babies, not at the camera, and neither of us is smiling in a posed way. We are just there, present, tired, alive. Someone who didn't know our story might look at that photograph and see 2 women and 2 babies on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. They would be right. That is exactly what it is. And that ordinary Sunday, that simple, quiet, unbroken afternoon, is the most radical thing Danny never managed to take from us. I am 27 years old. I live in a small apartment with a daughter who has her father's dark eyes and my mother's loud laugh. I work 2 jobs, and I am tired most of the time. And some nights I sit on the bathroom floor after she's asleep, and I feel the full weight of everything this year took from me. But I get up. Every single morning, I get up. Because she is in the next room. Because my mother is across town, getting up too. Because 2 women who were broken by the same man refused in the end to stay broken. That is not a happy ending. It is something better than that. It is a true one. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. New stories every week. You are not alone.